So, I wanted to show you some basic editing tools that you can access in Photopea. Like I said in the last video, Photopea works a lot like Photoshop, so it's a great preparation for when we get back to the classroom and you're able to use Photoshop because many of the tools, almost all the tools, are pretty much the same. And you'll find with lots of software, lots of editing software, that there are similarities between those different platforms. Okay, so first off, let's open up an image. Let's see what I have here. Okay. How about this one? Maybe this one. Okay. This is a picture of some lichens and moss that were growing on top of my dad's shed. Not bad. There's some nice detail here, but it's a little bit dark. You're not getting a whole lot of the color out of this picture. Now, before we do any serious editing, it's probably good to start working with layers. Layers are over here on the right side. Sometimes these move around. If you ever lose it, you can also click right here to bring it back up. And what I'm going to simply do, because we're going to keep this really simple, is I'm just going to drag this down to this little folded piece of paper, which duplicates the layers. So basically, I have my original picture now at the bottom, and then I'm going to do my editing on this upper layer. So I'm basically editing on top of the picture, but I can always go back and see the original. Okay, so let's try a few things. First off, let's do a little cropping. We'll get a little bit closer to our subject here. Kind of don't like that little bit of something at the bottom. I think that's going to be distracting once I crop in. So I'm getting rid of it. All right, that looks a little bit better as far as like the framing of the subject. Sometimes you should look for distracting elements or things along the edge to make sure that it all works together and is cohesive. Let's do a little bit with some adjustments. So, like I showed you before, we've got our contrast up here, my different contrast controls. I have some color controls here. Let's go into curves. And let's try to bring out some details. So I'm brightening the light areas right now. And by the way, curves, like I showed you before, gives me a histogram of my image. So if you see this, you'll notice that there's almost nothing right here. That's because there's actually not a true light value in here. And so I want to make one. So I'm going to bring this over a little bit. But in doing that, I kind of washed out a part of my picture. So I'm going to drag this down a little bit so it pops just a bit more. There's limits to what you can do, but I really feel like that helps define my area a bit more. So I'm going to say okay. Now, there were other ways that I could have done that. Just to show you the difference, though, here's like the before and after. So I'm clicking this little eye icon to make the top layer become hidden so you can see the original, and then this to bring it up again. And you could have just as easily used brightness and contrast. These sliding bars might be a little bit simpler to use at the beginning just to brighten and darken the picture, and then adding contrast and reducing contrast. But anything that you're doing in this window, you can also do in curves and levels. So both of these work really well for that as well. Okay, so I think I have the contrast the way I want it now. Now I'm going to go in and I want to play with the color. So that's right in here. So let me go into hue saturation. And what I can do with the hue saturation is I can actually adjust the tones through hue, so you can kind of play around with this and create some different effects. I don't want to substantially change the color of my image, but I might want to make the color pop a bit more. And I can do that here through saturation. So I can saturate more. I can go really crazy with it. That's like too much. Maybe somewhere in here just to kind of bring it to life a bit more. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so that just with a few adjustments, with a little bit of contrast and a little bit more color, I was able to take this picture, which is a little bit duller and flatter, and really make it pop. A few more tools that I want to show you that I think might be helpful for you when you're doing your editing are right over here. This tool I want to show you, this is the Dodge tool. Now, if I click and hold this, it'll bring up some other tools as well. So like you can see, I've got Dodge and I have Burn. This is a lot like when you're in the dark room, right? You got the Dodge tool and the Burn tool. So dodging is going to lighten areas, burning is going to darken areas. Now, what's kind of neat about this, let's say if we go with the Burn tool, is I can adjust some things up here at the top. So I can adjust the size of the tool, all right? So if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can make it bigger. Maybe I'll even go a bit bigger yet, so you can see that. I can also adjust how hard the edges of the brush are, all right? So think of this like as a brush. So right now it's at 100% hard. We want to make a much softer brush. You don't want it to be too harsh. And then I can adjust what I'm darkening. So I can set, do I want to darken the shadows? Do I want to deepen those? Do I want to darken the midtones? Or do I want to darken the highlights? And this one, I think I'm going to leave it as the midtones. And then the last thing you can control up here on these brushes is the exposure. So I can make it so it is, really heavy, or I can make it far more transparent and lighter when I'm applying my my brush. All right, I'll go like in the middle like it was. So what this should do is when I click it, it's going to darken the midtones like that, but it's going to leave the lighter tones alone. So you can kind of see how I'm like darkening the midtones, and when I went across there, it didn't really affect that lighter area. Let me click it again. I think you can kind of see what it's doing. So that's the Burn tool. In this case, I probably don't want to do this, so I'm going to back up. If you look over here in the history, as I had mentioned before, I can undo things. Now, I can undo things through edit as well by stepping backward. If you can click undo, but that's only really for one thing. So probably a better way to do it is to actually access the history, and then we'll go back to when I adjusted the color. And so that's going to undo all the burning. Now what I could do, which should be nice, is I could create a little bit of a vignette around here. And there's different ways of doing that. One way you could do that, though, is through burning. So I'll make my brush a little bit bigger. Maybe even a little bit bigger than that. Yeah, that's probably good. And then I can go around the edge. Gotta let it catch up with me here. Go around the edge, and I can darken some of these areas around the photo. Notice it's not touching that as much because the brush right now is set to midtones. But if I go up in here and I set it to highlights, I'll be able to darken this light area here. And so this might be something that you want to do to help better emphasize your subject. I'll go back here to the move tool or the selection tool. I've got a little pointer here so I can point at things. And just to show you the before and after again, if I click on that little eye icon, you're back to the original file. If I click on this to show it again, you can see that I've boosted the contrast, boosted the color, and also create a little vignette around my area, around my photo, my subject, to really highlight and emphasize my subject. What are some other tools I want to show you? This is an interesting tool, the clone stamp. Now, for this one, it probably makes more sense if you were editing dust or lint off of a print that you made in a dark room. But it's kind of a neat thing just to know about. You can kind of have some fun with it. The clone stamp, make this a little bit bigger here, does just what it says it does. And in later tutorials or later videos, I'll use this to show you how to clean up dust and lint. But for now, just so you're aware of it, just like the dodging and burning tools, which you should definitely experiment with, burning darkens, dodging lightens, but they're brushes. And the clone stamp is like that too. You can adjust the size here, you can adjust the hardness. I think I'm going to go with a soft brush, and I can adjust the opacity, which means I can make it more and less transparent. And the way this one works, if I want to clone something, which I don't know that I really need to do this, but it might be kind of fun to do this. If I hold Alt, you get this little plus. This is where you're cloning from. Then I click that in order to set it to that point. And then I can clone it somewhere else. Oh, so I added another little lichen there in the background. So that's something that you can play around with. Like I said, it works really well for editing images, especially if you're working with dust and lint. It's easy to get rid of background elements or use the background elements to fill some spaces that are damaged. Maybe not as useful in this particular picture. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, you know what? I think I have this picture pretty much the way I want it. So I'm going to go up into File, and I am going to export that as a JPEG. Here I want to show you a few things. First off, you can format it for different types of files. I think it probably makes most sense to save these as JPEGs. That's going to flatten the file. And then don't worry so much about this. This has to do with the dimensions of the image, but I always like to turn the quality up all the way. And this sliding bar isn't moving up. There it is. Always like to set that to 100%. Then I go ahead and save it. Now, something that I do want you to realize, and that just saved down here. Something that I do want you to realize is that a JPEG flattens all this. So you'll no longer be able to edit that background layer again. So something that you might want to do, or something I definitely want you to do, is I want to make sure that you're not overwriting your files. Always make a copy of your original file first, which I have already done, because once you've done that editing and you've saved it, and you've overwritten your original file, you won't be able to go back. And it's important to be able to go back and re-edit the original file in case you needed to start over at some point. I want to show you one more thing. Now, this PSD little file extension here, this is a Photoshop file. And this will keep these two layers. So if you want to continue working with this, then you might want to save it that way. I'm not going to do that right now though, because I want to move on to another picture. So let me open up this one. I took this one in Geneva, an old building. I really liked how the leaves were kind of dead in this upper part, but really vibrant in orange and red at the bottom. Let's fit this to screen. Okay, I guess it is as big as it's going to go. Well, we can make it bigger this way. Okay. And then I want to show you how to make an image black and white. So if I go into adjustments and I go to black and white, this is kind of a special way to do it. Now, sometimes people will do it this way, and this isn't a wrong way to do it. You can go to hue saturation like we had before, and you can drop the saturation down all the way to make it gray this way. So you've removed the color essentially, but you haven't been able to work with the color. And this is what I mean by that. If you go into black and white, it breaks up the original color image into different gray values based on the color. So I can adjust the reds. So those are those leaves there. I can adjust the yellows. I don't know if there was a whole lot of green in that picture, so not much is changing there. Not much cyan. You'll kind of find out a lot about your image by sliding these bars around. Oop, a little bit at the top there. I don't know if you can see it at the top. And the magenta. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the magenta down to help bring out the detail up here. So if you watch that up there, you can kind of see what happens when I play with this bar. I'm going to adjust that down so it kind of highlights more of these branches. And then I want to bring out a little bit more detail in these leaves. Now, quite honestly, I think I like the color version better, but I just wanted to show you a way of converting a picture to black and white and how you can basically have a lot more control over that process when you use this black and white setting. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to go a little bit further with this though. And this time I'm going to use levels to adjust my picture. This is just another way to control contrast. And I'm going to try to make it pop a bit more. That looks pretty good. And so then there's that. Now if I decide, oh, I'm not that into this, I can always go back to my original picture too. Or forward again if I want to see what it looks like with my edits. So that kind of shows you a few things that would be good for you to know. We'll talk about more things as we keep going further. But just to recap, you have your dodge and burn tools. You have your clone stamp tool right here. And then you have some really great ways to work with the colors and the contrast in your images. All right. Well, you guys all have a wonderful day. Experiment a bit with your images. Try doing some editing. Try doing some cropping. See what you can, how you can enhance the images that you're uploading. All right. Have a great day.